Okay, in this section we're going to talk a little bit about what we need to know about the brain and brain performance, brain function, in order to be able to provide these services with the direct neurofeedback. We don't have to know everything there is to know about the brain or all the systems of the brain, but it's good to know some of the things. And when we talk about neurofeedback, often we're looking at ways to train the brain to work differently. And most often in traditional neurofeedback, you're training people to inhibit slow brainwave activity. We call that focus, to inhibit slow brainwave activity, or to make more energy in places up the scale, whether it's alpha activity or low beta activity or whatever. So that's kind of traditional neurofeedback. We're going to cover some of that today in these lessons. Let's see, there's going to be 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 1 to 3 lessons here, 3 videos in this unit. So we'll try to give you the background enough to sort of see what's going on, because with direct neurofeedback, we're not training this or that brainwave. We're not training less delta and more beta. We're not doing that. But what we do see in direct neurofeedback, whether it's a lens system or any other system, our generation 4 system, whatever it might be, we do see a decrease in amplitude naturally occurring from the direct neurofeedback in slow brainwave activity. So that may indicate that some of the generators of slow brainwave activity, which we'll look at here, could be a head injury, it could be just fuzzy thinking, brain fog, it could be just the part of the brain that says, let's go to sleep now. The intensity of that will decrease just with ongoing direct neurofeedback training. So it is an interesting side effect, or perhaps it is the most important effect of direct neurofeedback. So let's look at this first one. It's sort of a primer for understanding the brain. So the central nervous system, and many of you know this, some of you it's all new. It doesn't matter. You're all gonna be good when we're all done here. Central nervous system. So the cortex, and particularly the frontal lobes of the brain, inhibit and modulate our emotions and our responses. Think of it, here's simply put, think of it like this. Spinal cord comes up and you have deeper structures of the brain like the limbic system, and they will generate emotions like anxiety, depression, fear, anger, and so on. Among other things it does, sort of modulating all the information that comes in through the nerves to the brain from the outside world, figuring out what's important and what's not. And then this is where you'll hear phrases like reticular activating system, that it sort of decides what's important to pass on to the outside part of the brain and what to throw in the trash. So as it generates things like these emotions, the outside part of the brain, 70% of the brain is there to inhibit the other 30%. Pretty good rule of thumb. It takes 70% of the brain to inhibit this, because this is pretty powerful. So if the outside part of the brain is not working at 100%, well, sorry to throw all those percentages out, but if it's not working at full speed, then a lot of this stuff leaks out, and that's where we see impulsive behaviors, whether it's ADD or whether it's from a head injury, impulsive, anger, difficulty concentrating, whatever it might be. I mean, it's a number of symptoms. So the outside part of the brain, particularly the frontal lobes, are going to inhibit and modulate and decide what's important to feel and do and respond and all of those things. And if it's not working at full speed, then a lot of behaviors that people really don't want or like start to leak out. So that's important, and we're going to really help the function of the frontal lobes and the cortex in general through the direct neurofeedback training. And then you'll see some of those symptoms, impulsivity and so on, just sort of decrease. They'll improve. So we have two, in the autonomic nervous system, there's two parts to that. So there's this, I did not name these, but there's a sympathetic nervous system and a parasympathetic nervous system. Two parts of that. So the sympathetic nervous system is bigger than the parasympathetic nervous system. When it comes to things like our cranial nerves, there are twice as many. There are 8 of the cranial nerves that are related to the sympathetic nervous system and 4 that are related to the parasympathetic. So basically, we are wired 2 to 1 to be under the influence of the sympathetic nervous system, which is the part of our nervous system that keeps us safe. It makes us nervous, creates anxiety. It tells us, I would not do that if I were you. I don't think I'll go there. This is where one psychologist wrote in her book that, yeah, we're all descendants of nervous people. Think of it that way. That 10,000 years ago on a hunting party, people who were not nervous were eaten before people who were nervous. And so we're all descendants of nervous people. So we're wired 2 to 1 to be stressed, nervous, anxious, worried. We're wired 2 to 1 to be like that. But it keeps us alive. It keeps us from playing football on the freeway. You know, we tend to not do a lot of dumb things. The parasympathetic nervous system is the part of the nervous system that we get breaks, we rest, we recover, we restore, where the sympathetic nervous system is the fight or flight thing, the amygdala, which is the warrior of the brain, and the hippocampus, and these things, which is a memory stick in the brain, and the amygdala down here at the bottom. And it looks for perceived threats. The amygdala is looking for anything that moves. This is why a speaker on a stage should move, because you can't take your eyes off him if he's moving. Anything that moves, you have to look at. So the sympathetic nervous system is like the engine in a Corvette. And the parasympathetic nervous system, unfortunately, is like that Corvette, but with bicycle brakes. We're wired 2 to 1 to be nervous, anxious, vigilant, stressed. And sometimes we can harness that in a really great way. And sometimes we can't. So people get, a wide variety of symptoms. So one of the things we are trying to do with the direct neurofeedback is to turn down the volume on the sympathetic nervous system and turn up the volume in the parasympathetic nervous system. And people respond really quickly to that. You will see this as you do treatment. People will come in stressed, complaining about their work, wired, negative, and then just maybe halfway through the session, you'll notice they start talking about someplace they like to go and something they like to do, and then they'll start to talk about, instead of 10 thoughts trying to get my attention, there's just one. I have this clear thinking. I am more relaxed. My neck's relaxed, my shoulders are relaxed, my hands are warmer. These are all symptoms of a parasympathetic response. The more blood is flowing into their hands, and so the hands are feeling warmer, maybe their feet feeling warmer, maybe clarity of vision. Just the shift is taking place as we're able to activate, turn on the parasympathetic part of the autonomic nervous system. So that's a clue that, we'll talk about this later, but that's a clue that that's time to stop the session and just let the brain take it from there. When your clients shift over into a parasympathetic state. Neurotransmitters, we got all these things that we talked about with the function of the brain. We have neurotransmitters, that's an important conversation. We have brain waves, we have the electrical element of the brain. The brain is both chemical and electrical. So the neurotransmitters, you'll hear people talk mostly about things like dopamine, serotonin, acetylcholine, GABA. Really an interesting book by a guy named Eric Braverman. His work is just interesting. He's a medical doctor. He's got a thing online called the Braverman test, which kind of tells you which of those four main neurotransmitters you're kind of dominant in, and he relates them to personality tests. That GABA dominant people are boring like me and tend to be steady and show up to work and have alarm clocks and those kinds of things, and as opposed to a dopamine driven dominant person, that their personality will be different and it'll show up on personality tests differently. It's really interesting work by Eric Braverman. BravermanTest.com. It's free. It's interesting. And then there's a company called Natural Stacks that took all that work and then created products around it to help your brain make more of those particular neurotransmitters. It's not the neurotransmitter itself, it's the precursors to that, so the brain can do with it what it wants to do with it, take what it wants and not take what it doesn't want. And I like them. I take them every day. I like the dopamine and serotonin and acetylcholine, and the last thing I need is GABA, but I'll take it at night to help me sleep. But somebody else might need primarily GABA to calm down and slow down and relax a bit. It's an inhibitory neurotransmitter. So anyway, that's just an aside when it comes to neurotransmitters. I'd kind of look at some of that work. It's helpful. Whether the direct neurofeedback will impact neurotransmitters directly or not, I don't know, maybe. I know the CES unit, there's research on that's been published, that within minutes of turning the dial on a CES unit, the brain is making more serotonin, like 5 minutes. It's already producing more serotonin, measured in the blood. And then within 15 minutes, more GABA and more serotonin. So I would expect that anything that's going to turn on the parasympathetic nervous system, activate that better, is doing that. I just haven't seen a study on it, but I would suspect that it's true. The brain is a battery. Brain is like running on 3 watts of energy and electricity. Brain's a battery. And so anything that lowers the wattage in the brain will cause problems, whether they're mental health issues or actual physical disease processes. So we want to keep the brain's energy level high, and that comes from things like hydration and eating right, and maybe by things like direct neurofeedback. It's kind of weird, but it's pretty awesome. So I wonder, just between me and you, as you're getting trained here, I wonder, when I used to live in the mountains in Bear Valley Spring, we're at 5,000 feet, and winters could be cold. And there were times I'd go out to my Chevy Tahoe, greatest car ever made, and I'd turn the key and like the battery's low just because it's cold. And some of you who live in the Midwest or the Northeast, you get it. So I would put the little trickle charge thing at night on the battery and plug it into the wall in the garage, and we'd give this small charge of electricity in the battery overnight, and then the battery would be awesome the next morning. And I kind of wonder to what extent that's part of what we're doing with the direct neurofeedback. So just keep that in mind, because we are, even though the energy that we're doing with the brain with the direct neurofeedback is really teeny weeny tiny energy that the brain still responds to and adjusts to, I wonder to what extent we're also putting the brain at optimal levels of energy, of electrical activity. Nobody's measured that. I've never seen the research, but I kind of think so. Hebbian principle is this: neurons that fire together wire together. So this is all now in the world of neuroplasticity, and each one of you watching this has some sense of neuroplasticity, what it means to you and what it means to other people as you change habits, how hard it is to change a habit that you've developed, how hard it is to develop a new habit, how hard it is to stop an addictive process. All of those things, because when we do things over and over again, we create these freeways, these highways of neural pathways, and neurons that are firing together or wiring together. We create really powerful pathways. That's why it's important, for instance, for athletes, not just to practice. Whoever coined the term "practice makes perfect" was wrong. It's perfect practice makes perfect. And if we practice perfectly, even under stress, the things that we practice the most are the things that we do under stress, because we've made those connections, we've wired those things. And I have seen people under tremendous stress practice hospitality. When I was a pastor, I had a phone call one day that this woman called the church and said her husband had died overnight. Could I come over? So I came over to the house. I mean, this woman was under the most stress she'd ever been under in her life. Her husband had just died. And could I sit with her while the family came over and the county came over and all those things? So sure. So I just sat with her. She invited me into her kitchen and she offered me a slice of pie. Well, because her whole life she had practiced hospitality. And so under pressure, she did the thing she had practiced the most, hospitality. She liked some coffee, liked some pie. So that's how it plays out. So if you're a second baseman and you practice doing things perfectly under stress, you'll do things perfectly, or a football player or whatever sport. So we wire what we practice. So don't ever practice goofing off on a field, because under pressure, it's what you'll tend to do. Neurons that fire together, wire together. Well, part of what this means is we have networks, we have systems, learning changes our brain, we prune things that are not important in our brain, we rewire our brain all the time. That means you and I can build the brain we want to have if we do the right things. We can build, using the concepts of neuroplasticity, we can build the kind of brain we want to have. If we want to have a brain that responds quickly, that makes decisions quickly, that anticipates things correctly, that is bigger, stronger, faster, we can do that. Yeah, we can do that. I do a lot of work with foster kids, timed out foster kids right now. We volunteer over at a wonderful nonprofit here in Arizona. And each one of the students that are there, they're 18 to 22 years old, and they're timed out of the foster system. And then, of course, Dallas, that you may have met at this point. Dallas, once upon a time, ran a home for teenage foster girls and lived there with them. So when you come across people like that, people who've come out of the foster care system, you'll notice their brain, you see it from their responses, emotional responses to things. Their brain is wired for survival because of what they endured that got them into the foster care system at 3 years old, 5 years old, 7 years old, 10 years old, whatever they endured, their brain adjusted to that environment. The brain adjusts to our environment. Every time you learn something new, the brain changes. Every time you're in a new environment, the brain adapts to that and wires to that. So the foster kids, young and old, their brain is wired now for survival. not for sharing, not for planning for the future. This is why that kind of universal thing that you read about with orphans, foster kids, they want food next to their bed at night so they can sleep. And if the parents don't let them do that, they're sneaking the food in there. That the brain is wired for survival. Now, for those who grew up in a situation like I did, which was like Ozzie and Harriet, I was in a very comfortable situation. So my brain became wired for learning and success because I didn't have to worry about survival. I just had to show up. So my brain was wired for different things. So as you meet with your clients, you're going to see this. That's why you kind of want to know about the background. You both want to know kind of where they come from and where do they want to be, so that you can not only just do direct neurofeedback with them to help their brain work more optimally, but also you can help guide them into exercises or things that they can learn or people they can meet that can help them get from where they are now to where they want to go with their brain. But because of neuroplasticity, you can have, your clients can have the kind of brain they want to have, even though in the past it was wired for XYZ. In the future, they can wire it for whatever it is they want. So it's a fantastic idea that the brain is plastic, it changes, and it changes right up until we die. That we can continue to learn and shape our brain and mold our brain and make it work the way we want it to. And this direct neurofeedback is one of the elements in freeing us up to create the kind of brain that we want to have. All right, that's the first video in this unit. And in the next video, we're going to talk about the brain waves, brain electrical things to help you understand brain waves a whole lot better. All right, thanks.